I have read a fiery gospel writ in burnished rows of steel. As ye deal with my contenders, so with you my grace shall deal. Let the hero born of woman crush the serpent with his heel, since God is marching on. I have seen him in the watchfires of 100 circling camps. They have builded him an altar in the evening dews and damps. I have read his righteous sentence by the dim and flaring lamps. His day is marching on. He has sounded forth the trumpet that shall never call retreat. He is sifting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. He is coming like the glory of the morning on the wave. He is wisdom to the mighty, he is honor to the brave. So the world shall be his footstool, and the soul of wrong his slave. Our God is marching on.
John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave, but his truth goes marching on. What are we willing to give our lives to? What are we willing to give our lives for? How fiercely should we resist evil? Can we be corrupted by our righteousness? John Brown hated slavery with every fiber of his heart, his soul, and his body. And because his body followed so faithfully the urgings of his heart and soul, he ended his brief term upon this earth, swinging by the neck at the end of a hangman's rope. John Brown dreamed one great dream, a dream of freedom and brotherhood. And because he stood simply, steadfastly, and unflinchingly for that dream, the earth shifted on its axis. We begin.
The value of portraying Brown and presenting Brown, correcting history, if you will, keeping the mission of Brown alive, the issues around racism, what the hope of our society is to resolve these issues. And representing John Brown is the best that I can do. So often people refer to John Brown as being a fanatic, and I prefer to think of him as being highly focused. He seemed to have a design for action that was very clear to him. He's a very, very good company for me. And I think I'm just the guy. I'm just the guy to portray John Brown. I grew up in what we might call abject poverty in the South. And in poverty in the South was quite unlike anything we know today. There's no place to go for help if you're poor. That you do what you can and you survive if you can. My family was really the poorest family in this whole part of the county. We were actually poorer than blacks, for the very strange reason that my father died when I was 13, and my mother was then left to provide for the 5 children. And the intelligent thing, or the appropriate thing for her to do would have been to collect welfare because she had no means of income. She had no skills, and she had 5 young children at home, so that the idea of even her going out to work, even if she could get a job, was unheard of. So that it seemed appropriate that she should apply for some kind of home relief or welfare, and her family and friends all discouraged her in that regard because this was for blacks, this was not for whites. So for years we had 5 children living on, I think, $98 a month Social Security, and so I spent many evenings and afternoons stealing farm produce out of farmers' fields so that my family would have something to eat. I would learn to shoplift at this local store, and I felt really degraded by that, having to do that. And so I grew up feeling less than deserving, that I was less than other people because I was less than other white people. Thank God we had blacks I had them to look down on. I probably couldn't have survived emotionally. The relationship between races were probably not too different than they were during slavery, that the black people were pretty much tied to the land. They were ill-educated. There was only one black high school in the county that I lived in, and it was probably a 30-mile ride there. I would see the black school bus going by like at 7:15, 7:20 in the morning, going, taking kids to the other end of the county, to start school at 9 o'clock. The elementary school was, which I also would pass by on my way to school, was a little shack, a wooden shack, which I think had 3 rooms in it. I never went inside it, but that was the entire elementary school for this whole end of the county. I mean, it did not seem naturally a wrong thing as I was growing up. I mean, the system of segregation was so complete and so well justified that I don't really think I thought about it twice until I got out of the South and had to work, mostly in the Army, had to work with black people who were obviously at least as smart as I was, and many times much smarter, brighter. I mean, that was an astounding the thought to learn that there were black people who were intelligent.
There's another scene in the play, one of the early turning points of Brown's life and the play, where he first comes back with the man he's been traveling with to his home and finds their chained slave in the yard there, who's been treated especially horribly. I wonder if there's an incident in your own life that marks that same kind of realization.
Yes. I was in the Army. I was 21 years old. I'd been in the Army almost 3 years. I had been an athlete when I was younger. I'd played football at a reasonably high level. I'd been transferred to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, and there wasn't a post football team. So, since I had this background of being a big football jock, I was appointed the player coach of the team, and we were playing a game, and we had there was a black man on the team who was very fond of, and he was one of the star players of that team. And I think we were in the finals for the post championships. We were playing the MPs or something, and we took a timeout, and and somebody brought some water out onto the field for us to drink, and it was a bucket, the old-fashioned, the bucket and the dipper, and this guy who we had kind of a bonded friendship, and he took the dipper and the bucket and drank the water and handed me the dipper. And I said, no thanks, I don't want any water. Well, I mean, he knew exactly what the deal was immediately. And, you know, his face, you know, in the midst of this very competitive football game, his face, I saw his disappointment in me in that moment, and I saw how deeply, you know, how deeply he was hurt. And I said, God, I will never do that to a human being. I will never do that to a human being again as long as I live.
I had never before seen an African chained to a post in their yard. They kept a black slave, just a boy like me. He didn't even have whiskers on his face. He was naked and half starved, and it was obvious he could not live through the winter. They made him sleep outside in the bitter cold with only a thin blanket to cover him. I heard the kind voices of my companion and his family turn harsh with abuse as they ridiculed and tormented this poor slave. They whipped him savagely for the slightest infraction and fed him only the most vile scraps, rotting garbage that even their hogs would have refused to eat. Once, when they caught him stealing a bit of decent food, I saw him beaten with an iron shovel until blood gushed from his wounds. I became sick at the sight of it, but this man was unabashed in his cruelty. He said to me, "Hey, son, you gotta remember that a nigger ain't nothing but a two-legged mule." This play is not a work of fiction. This play is based, it was taken from documents, from records. Slave owners could kill blacks, you know, if they wanted to. Yeah, they'd be ill-advised to do so because it's tearing up money. It's money they're throwing away. Once in the Jim Crow South, when blacks were just niggers, you know, then no problem killing a nigger. That's not a problem. Killing a slave is a problem.
I'm playing devil's advocate for a minute. There's a room full of young black people in this room. I noticed that you like to throw around that N-word. Did anyone ever say anything to you about it? Because that's a sensitive topic amongst other people.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm doing history. I mean, you can't tell me that that word has never been used by white people against black people. You can't tell me that.
Well, they don't use it openly and fluently as you do. I mean,
well, I mean, I'm not afraid of it. I'm not afraid of it. I mean, it's I put it in the context, and you know, I'm not here to make anybody feel good. I'm here to tell the truth. But what's more horrible than the word is the attitude, and that word simply reflects that idea. And it's the idea that's the abomination. And I mean, you know, if you got to use the word, you got to use the word. You know, I didn't make that decision. You know what I mean?
Do you use the word when you're not quoting somebody?
Oh, I might use the word. You know, once, I mean, I would never. I will use it in the Jim Crow.
We don't want
South.
no niggers in Kansas, free or slave. I responded, "It is not the poor black slave who is your enemy. It is the rich white slave owner."
The night of May 24th, 1856, Brown retaliated for a pro-slavery raid on Lawrence, Kansas. Brown, 4 of his sons, and 3 others took 5 settlers from their homes along Osawatomie Creek. They then shot or hacked to death these alleged Kickapoo Rangers.
Kansas. Oh, bloody Kansas. It was no place for a compromise in 1856. Southern politicians tried to turn the Kansas Territory into a slave state. Popular sovereignty, my foot. Importing drunkards from the slums of southern cities to vote for slavery.
My sons and I went to Kansas to resist them. We formed a militia, and we stopped them at the Battle of Blackjack. My little band of 25 or so defeated a force of some 275 men and sent those marauders hightailing it back to Missouri. But they soon retaliated under a banner proclaiming the supremacy of the white race. 1,000 of those barbarians burned the town of Lawrence, beating people, killing 7 innocent citizens.
I always ask people when I talk about the history of this period, if you hated slavery in the late 1850s, what would you have wanted to do?
What can we do about it? You can follow me. You can all follow me. God has anointed me to wreak his vengeance on the Kickapoo Rangers. I will teach these barbarians that we can fight too. I will strike a blow to avenge every death that they have caused. I will end slavery in the United States by any and all means that I find necessary.
Here in my pocket, I have a list with 7 names on it. 7 of their leaders. 7 murderous criminals who do not deserve to ever again see the light of day. I do not shrink from what must be done. The sight of blood gives me no pause, for there can be no remission of sin without the spilling of blood.
The status quo view is that John Brown, and his sons and some others killed innocent settlers, dragged them out of their beds and killed them.
That night, we changed America forever. Before then, not a single hand had been raised to oppose the shame of our nation. After this sacrament in the swamp, oh, how willingly and joyfully I made war on the minions of Satan in slavery. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord.
It was God's will that I executed that night. I struck a blow for freedom in 1856. Those 7 savages, those 7 Kickapoo Rangers, fully deserved their fate.
The Free State settlers, though they did not want slavery in Kansas, and they were ultimately willing to fight against slavery coming to Kansas, they were themselves almost largely racist, and when they finally passed the Free State Constitution, they prohibited the settlement of blacks. So when you have a family like the Browns, when John Brown's sons were out there before Brown was out there, and they had already marked the Browns because the Browns were very vocal. In fact, they were up in your face about it. Because the Browns were not just anti-slavery. A lot of folk in the North were anti-slavery. When the Browns came rolling into Kansas, and when John Brown came into Kansas, when people started talking about black people, those were fighting words to the Browns. And that wasn't true about all Free State people. Free State people did not like blacks, did not necessarily want to live with them. Abe Lincoln would be the typical figure for that. He was against slavery, but it didn't offend his human sensibilities, it didn't offend his theology, it didn't offend his morality. He didn't believe blacks were equal. That comes out in the play.
God made it clear to me that these Africans were my brothers and sisters, my equals in his eyes. And despite jeers and ridicule from most white people, I address blacks as sir, a man. Abraham Lincoln believed blacks to be inferior to whites. Now, he once said, "Boys, the Negro is not my equal in any respect, which I believe will forever forbid the 2 races from living together on terms of political and social equality." Lincoln was wrong.
The Browns were egalitarians. They were pro-black.
Right.
They were almost black nationalists in 1960s terms.
If I had to choose, because when you said Martin Luther King, she said, that's right, nonviolence. Personally, I'm a John Brown's girl and a Malcolm X girl myself, because I love Martin Luther King. I respect him. He was a beautiful man at heart, but I don't feel that Martin Luther King's method was the best either, because we're back in 2004 dealing with the same issues. Right, because if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything.
Slavery was reinstituted again after
Exactly.
Jim Crow,
Exactly.
so that slavery
Exactly.
existed almost in its original form. I've never had to experience it directly, but I see it happen. I mean, I'm from the South. My father was a Klansman. My great-grandfather owned slaves. I've been aware, acutely aware, of the relationship across the color line every moment of my life.
When you go back into the white neighborhoods, like the ones that are really racial, aren't you like intimidated by them, by going in there and actually doing display? Because I moved from New York to Miami, and I'm telling you, I turned a corner down south somewhere, and I experienced this myself. There were men with white things over their head, with the Confederate flag on the highway. There was no cars around.
Oh, I think you got it.
And they were just shaking their thing and calling me.
I know a lot of white people, man.
But I do that.
Cannot
Brecht Forum, New York City, August 28, 2004. Norman Marshall performs at a benefit for radical human rights attorney Lynn Stewart, on trial for conspiring to aid terrorists and lying to the government. She is charged with smuggling messages from her jailed client, blind Muslim cleric Omar Abdel Rahman, who was serving a life term on terrorism charges.
There is a bomb.
I want to thank all of you for coming out in support of the Lynn Stewart Defense and the Brecht Forum and the city chapter of the National Lawyers Guild.
9 years now, it's been my privilege to travel about the country and actually into Europe to portray this great American John Brown. And tonight we're here to celebrate and support Lynn Stewart, who is doing the same work that John Brown was doing 150 years ago.
I mean, in my lifetime, I've lived through some rather cataclysmic events. But I think the most startling day of my life, the things where the environment was the most affected by events, was the day that the Brown versus Board of Education decision was announced. I was riding in a car with my algebra teacher. My teacher was absolutely beside himself hearing this news on the radio. He almost wrecked the car. And he went into an incredible tirade about how this couldn't possibly be. Well, all around me for the next several weeks, several months even, the people were absolutely incredulous, white people, that this was such a horrible fate that blacks would have to go to school with whites. It seemed such a horrible fate that it could not possibly ever happen. That it was so much of a cataclysmic event that people, obviously it would never happen. Obviously this is not going to come to pass, that blacks will have to go to school with whites. And people were so hideously traumatized. Well, of course, then this is 1954, and it was many years before even the first integration of it began to happen. But 2 years later, I was graduating from high school, and the speaker at my high school was a man named J. Lindsay Almond, who was then the lieutenant governor of the state of Virginia. And on the stage there of the auditorium where I was graduating, he made this fiery, racist speech, and he noticed that all the people who were getting their diplomas tonight, they all had white skins, and I pray to God that there will never be a black face sitting on the stage to get a high school diploma from this school. He later became a federal judge. He was appointed by Kennedy.
And honestly, in my opinion, I'm past the color issue. It's not black, it's not white, it's a green issue. Show me the
I
money.
think one funny thing about it now versus then is that, especially dealing in the North here now, people still have a lot of prejudice amongst us, and they try to hide it a little more. But when you go down to the South, because I'm from the South as well, from Virginia, and they still let you know. They don't try to hide it. They still don't try to hide it. To this day and age, you can be free, but they still do not give you the just respect that you receive as a human being, as a person. And they have no problem letting you know how they feel. And there's nothing you can do to change their mind. It was passed down from generation to generation, and I don't care about the Union of the States or anything like that. They still feel that this is their right. They feel that they're more than you. They will not be equal to you. Even when the schools did the segregation and the desegregation thing, my mother went to school the year that desegregation actually happened, the year she graduated from high school. And it just didn't change anything. The rules were there on paper. But the actions of the people is still, to this day, it doesn't change.
Okay, it's very easy to tell someone you could be anyone you want to become, and you go into bed with blisters in your stomach, or you don't have a decent place to sleep, or clean running water, or an education, or a leg to stand on.
It's just that I think that John Brown knew that in order to make a change, he had to give up his land, because sometimes people don't take things as serious until they hit home.
I've since come to realize that his glorious plan was for me to fail in order to be taken captive and thus become a martyr in his holy quest.
And he saw and stated that by his death, he's going to do more dead than alive. And he was right.
The abolitionist movement was based in the churches. And you had people like Beecher, who were very strong, and they were also very religious. And what made John Brown different was that he was really radical. Unlike William Lloyd Harrison, he was willing to pick up the gun to start the ball rolling. He was the catalyst. If you read the book by Thomas, What's the Matter with Kansas, you see that you have now the reactionary people who are going to abortion clinics and killing doctors, identifying with the abolitionist movement. They're proud that John Brown lived
they
in
see
Kansas.
him. A lot of people see John Brown in their own light.
So that's one of the things that maybe there's a possibility.
People in this church, these right-wing people who are, like I say, they 100% voting for Bush, they love John Brown.
I want you to attach to this character. I mean, when you do.
Me personally, I'm from the South. I'm from Virginia, and my great-grandfather was a slave owner. My father was a Klansman. So I've been living with, the color line and race all my life. It's been part of my consciousness and part of my thoughts, and so I thought this would be a good thing to John Brown is sort of the point where the two races merge, and there's a historian, William Davis, who's a great Civil War scholar at Virginia Tech, and he's a fairly conservative historian, but he said that you can't understand American history without studying John Brown, that all American history goes through John Brown.
Do you think the Civil War would have happened without John Brown?
No. He was one of the hundreds of forces that led to the Civil War. If you define him by the times, he was crazy. If you define him by our times, he was a visionary. It's from where you're looking. If you're black, he was a visionary, a hero. If you're white, he was a dangerous radical. He was a lot ahead of his times. If he had been born a century later, been much more effective. I agree with John Brown. Fits into how I grew up. When I was a kid, my Uncle John Wood Dunnigan and I would go to the movies, and the blacks had to sit in the balconies, We used to root for the Indians. Whenever there was a fight between, and about Custer, oh, we loved that. We rooted for the Indians in that case. It used to piss off the whites who were sitting down on the main floor.
The whole idea of protesting the government, the courts, the prison system, capital punishment even. The most delightful moment was when you played Harriet Tubman.
There was no such trepidation on the part of General Harriet Tubman. Now, they call George Washington a great general. But the greatest general I ever met was Harriet Tubman, and she was an escaped slave who couldn't read or write. Well, even without the privileges enjoyed by Washington, she still could have bested him in any contest. Well, she's a small woman, thin, gray-headed, and wrinkled. She's bravery personified. I have never seen courage so perfectly expressed in human form, man or woman, black or white. She freed more than 1,000 slaves. And I once asked her how she'd come to free so many. Oh, I could have freed 1,000 more if they had known they was slaves. I just did use half the sense that the Lord blessed me with, and I trust in Him so I don't have to worry about losing my nerve. I just come to the place where I'm going to do my business and walk right down the main street to see if any mischief going on. Nobody looked twice at the old colored lady all bent leaning on a stick. I always do my business in the wintertime. White people think slaves is too trifling to run off in the cold weather. So I just get word to the folks that we gonna set free then on the coldest, darkest Saturday night we can find. Yeah, we go. Old man, you get them guns out of Harper's Ferry and I'll send you 100 wagon loads of colored boys to shoot them.
You know, there were 5 million slaves in the South in 1859. I think that's about right? 5 million?
Around 4 million, right.
All right, 4 million. The United States Army was only about 16,000 men. So if he could have gotten 50,000 slaves, which wasn't impossible, in a population of 4 million, you know, he would have outnumbered the United States Army by, 50,000 to 16,000. It would have been possible.
And
it would have been very possible.
On October 16, 1859, Brown, with a force of 21 men, occupied the U.S. Arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. The arsenal was retaken and Brown was captured by federal forces under Colonel Robert E. Lee. 10 of Brown's men died, including 2 of his sons, along with 1 Marine, an innocent freedman, and Harper's Ferry's mayor.
Then, on a dark October evening, my men and I set out walking from the Kennedy farm. We marched that entire dark night to Harper's Ferry. Before dawn, my men and I stormed into the town and captured the arsenal and several hostages. Now, our troop consisted of 5 black soldiers, 13 whites, including 2 of my sons and me. Shortly afterwards, the first tragedy of this war occurred. My son Watson shot a man who had failed to respond to his command of halt. Shot him right through the lung, and he died coughing up his own blood. That man was Hayward Shepard, a recently freed slave who was on his way to work as a baggage handler at the Harper's Ferry train station. He was deaf, so he could not have heard Watson's command. The first man to die in this holy war to end slavery was himself a slave. My heart broke when I heard that news.
Then I heard the sound of marching feet on the bridge. I assumed it was runaway slaves marching to join us, so naturally I took most of the men out to greet them. Now, as we approached the bridge, I saw one of my best men, Dangerfield Newby, crossing the street toward the bridge. Now, Newby was an escaped slave and a brave and ferocious fighter. And I raised my arm in greeting, shouted, "Newby!" Immediately, a volley of musketry rang out from the bridge, and in the next instant, Newby lay flat on his back, a gaping hole in his forehead, his brains oozing out onto the cobblestone. For a moment, I stood frozen to the spot in shock. Then I started toward Newby, but my son Oliver grabbed my arm and pulled me back. I quickly recovered my wits and realized that we were in a dangerously exposed position. Back into the arsenal, boys! Or perhaps I should have escaped and survived to fight another day. But God had called me to be faithful to this cause, so that retreat was out of the question. From that moment, we were doomed. We were surrounded by the Virginia militias, so there was no chance of our fighting our way out. Soon, Colonel Robert E. Lee and Lieutenant Jeb Stuart arrived with a company of United States Marines. All that I could do now was pray for a miracle. When one did not occur, I began to question my own faith in God. So there I was with a 19-man army and a wagon load of spears for the regiment of slaves who never came.
According to the wonderful speech of Frederick Douglass, which he gave at Harper's Ferry, I think in the early 1880s, that before Harper's Ferry, the prospect for the freedom of the slave was dim, shadowy, and uncertain. And then he expressed that beautiful phrase, but when John Brown stretched forth his arm, the sky was cleared. That when Frederick Douglass heard that Harper's Ferry had been realized, he was speaking at an anti-slavery meeting, I think it was in Philadelphia, and he said that the audience for his speech received the news as if it were an earthquake. And the great writer Herman Melville said Brown was the meteor of the war. There were 180,000 black soldiers in the Union Army in the Civil War and about 30,000 black sailors. So we're talking about over 200,000 black people participating in the war of their own liberation. We do know one thing. We do know how black soldiers and many of the Union soldiers at the end of the war, and even many in the beginning, felt about him, because when many of the soldiers of General Sherman's army left Jonesboro to begin the march to the sea, they sang John Brown's body while they were marching.
I sent my son Watson out under a white flag of truce to discuss terms for the hostages. The bastards blew a hole in his back, and he died slowly. Oh, Father, Father, please shoot me through the head. Please, please. I cannot bear this pain. God has put us on this earth to feel pain, and He will release us when He sees fit. I do not approve of your dying at this time, but if you insist on doing so, then please do it like a man. I don't think he had it in him.
Stepping into the void. That's the courage to dream, the courage to gamble, the courage of people who made the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution or who fought the English Civil War. All of these things are acts of dreaming, or acts of optimism, or acts of courage.
Yes, I knowingly and willingly led an invasion to free the slaves. Well, of course, the jury convicted me after deliberating for less than an hour. Then Judge Parker pronounced sentence. John Brown, having been found guilty of the charges brought against you, I therefore sentence you for the crime of murder and treason, life imprisonment, for the crime of consorting with Negro slaves, to be hung by the neck until you are dead, and may God have mercy on your soul. The men who were captured with me were not afraid either. John A. Copeland, a free black and a graduate of Oberlin College, expressed his feelings during his trial. I would not shame my dead companions. They died brave men. I trust that I will do the same. You might think it foolish of me to throw away my life in such a rash venture, but Captain Brown possesses that strange power that allows him to hold sway over many. If he asked me to walk through the fiery furnace and spit in Nebuchadnezzar's face, I would do it with no questions asked. He is truly one of God's commanders. Besides, you know nothing of slavery. I know a great deal. It is the crime of crimes. Brown was absolutely clear about the brotherhood of all human life. He broke bread with blacks. When people, I mean, even the best of abolitionists would not do such a thing, would not entertain slaves or ex-slaves in their home, sit down, break bread with them. He, you know, as the play said, he called blacks Mr. and he addressed them respectfully. The scene with the baby, right? Remember the scene with the baby? To me, that's the most real scene in the play. As I was being led down the stairs of the jail, a young slave mother approached me, and she held her baby up to me. Captain Brown, anoint this child. I never thought I'd live so long as to see a white man who put his white lips on the lips of a black face. I hope this child lives a long time so she can testify that you've done it. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the brakes of wrath was sore. He hath loosed his feet with his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. Tomorrow, when they place his remains aboard the train, that will be the last that we will ever hear of this Osawatomie Brown. Signed, Robert E. Lee.
North and south the fire shall roll, hide by me. North and south the fire shall roll, hide by me. North and south the fire shall roll, how will it be with your poor soul? By that old rock of ages cleft for me. By that old rock of ages cleft for me.
Okay. All right, let's do it up tempo.
There's a bomb in Gilead.
We have an airplane.
Wait for the airplane.
Wait for
We
the
got an airplane.
Waiting for a train. Well, when we was recording in Tom T's, you know, there used to be railroad tracks right behind the damn studio. So we'd be getting after, I remember his damn train coming through. And if it was a long one, man, it was 20 minutes sometimes.
It was like when we were shooting at, what's another one? There's two. Shooting at Steve Freeze. It was a bus stop right outside.
Oh,
and it was fine, like as it was coming in, you couldn't hear it, but when they'd take off, you go, whoa!
There's something about a cup of coffee that makes me want a cigarette. The tobacco and the chicory seems to fit me to a T. They go together like guitars and shit. Sometimes I get up early in the morning and stir around before the sun comes up. So I start the coffee perking and I get my lighter working. Then I'll fill the ashtray in my coffee cup. There's just something about a cup of coffee that makes me want a cigarette. There's something about a smoke while sipping coffee. They're two of life's pleasures I enjoy. The smoke will make me dream while I stir in the cream. They go together just like Buck and Roy. When day is done and dinner's finally over, I retire to watch the TV set. I can understand much better, comprehending to the letter, when I've got my coffee and my cigarettes. There's just something about a cup of coffee that makes me want a cigarette. Oh yeah, that makes me want a cigarette. And that's the truth. I'm so proud of you.
You did it.